Have you ever binged through a whole cake? The Oreo cookies dipped in peanut butter, the Doritos in French onion dip, maybe all of the above, and then purge them. Maybe for you it wasn't sticking your finger in your throat, maybe it was X-Lax, maybe it was over exercising, just to make sure you got it all back off. Well, this episode is for you, or if you know somebody who was on your dorm floor, your roommate in college, maybe you now, maybe you've experienced that recently. The holidays are upon us, or we're just there, and it seems to roll into one holiday after another built around food or chocolate somehow. So it's fairly natural. And your entire life, you're conditioned that food is tied to emotions from the moment you're out of the womb. So we're talking all about emotional eating, yo-yo dieting, binging, bulimia, all the things. And we're talking, believe it or not, about a huge success story and how she's turned it into a career helping other women. I'm Deborah Atkinson. You're listening to Flipping 50, where I address your top struggles and concerns, and I share what to eat, how to move, and how to change your mindset so that you can have the energy and the vitality that you want, need, and deserve in this second and better half. Before we dive into today's episode, all about emotional eating, yo-yo dieting, and getting to the other side of it, I want to let you know that this episode's sponsor is brought to you by the 5-Day Flip. If you have not yet started your new year off with more movement, or you haven't defined what that looks for now, at the moment that you're in, the 5-Day Flip is a great start or restart. And within that 5-Day Flip, I share with you how your exercise, the workout I'm going to give you each day, 5 days in a row, will positively influence your hormones. So you can walk away from those 5 days saying, yes, I can fit this in. It doesn't have to be long to be good and give me energy, and know exactly how and why to lay out your exercise to benefit your hormones. That's the Flipping 50 5-Day Flip. Flipping50.com/5-Day Flip, and I'll put that link in the show notes so you can click right to it. Let's dive in. My guest today experienced food and weight struggles from many angles. She developed binge eating and exercise bulimia as a high school and college student. After ending that at 22, Debbie had no issues until hitting 40. Then, not only did she gain 25 pounds without doing anything differently, but she developed gout, digestive issues, joint pain, insomnia, and more. She wrestled with food, her weight, and the symptoms for 6 years. Slashing and burning calories didn't work like it did when she was in her 20s, and she had no idea what to do. At 46, Debbie Thompson finally stumbled upon the right information to not only lose 30 pounds, but all her symptoms disappeared. And she felt so good that for the first time she realized she could run more than a block. She went on to run several 5Ks, 10Ks, and a few 10-milers and one half marathon. In the process, she developed a passion to help other women over 40 experience wellness and food freedom too. She left her 25-year career as a social worker, went to health coaching school, and has helped women from their 40s through their 50s to feel ease with food for possibly the first time in their lives. And emotional eating and yo-yo dieting gain energy, ease symptoms, and most importantly, know that they know how to keep themselves doing it. I want to make clear as I read that bio, that is end emotional eating and yo-yo dieting, just to be clear. Debbie, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Listen, that is quite a story. That can keep us going for a little while. So we've got to unpack this, and definitely no listener here is probably surprised or unfamiliar with the fact that, wait a minute, you gained weight or things change and crop up, but you haven't done anything different. That perfectly describes perimenopause for a lot of women. But we have to say, you must have gotten in line twice, right? I mean, you got more than your share.
Yep, for sure.
So in that frustration, what did you do? And if we can just back up a second, I don't want to just skim over the binge eating and the exercise bulimia as a high school and college student. And you said you ended that at 22. How did you get over that?
Yeah, that's such a good question, and unfortunately such a unique experience. It literally was, I watched remember the old like TV movie of the week back in the day?
Vaguely.
I was watching the TV movie of the week with Meredith Baxter Burney from Family Ties, and she was a bulimic woman. And I remember up until then, all I thought I was doing was that I couldn't stay on a diet. I just thought, like, I just keep falling off the wagon. I did not recognize that I was in a cycle of, like emotional eating and very predictably binging and then purging. And for me, because I did not want to make myself throw up, that's where exercise just became a way for me to purge very, very purposefully after binging. So anyhow, I watched this movie, and as I'm watching her pattern, I just thought, that is me. That's exactly what I do. And I did not know it was a thing, because back then the only thing that was known was, regular bulimia. And I knew I wasn't that. So as I watched her, I just had such an insight come over me that, oh, okay, I just don't need to do that anymore. And it's so unusual, but it's all I needed to do. And I also know now that what I did in response to that is also what I teach women now, is intuitive eating. So instead of dieting back then, when I stopped the binge eating, I knew something just made me realize I needed to stop dieting too. I needed to stop the extremes, stop trying to starve myself, which again, science has sort of discovered is actually a leading cause of binge eating. It usually does result in those extremes. So I knew that I needed to stop doing that, in addition to not using any kind of purging. And I just sort of became an intuitive eater. But the problem with that is that all of a sudden at 40, that intuitive eating didn't give me the same results anymore.
Wow. Okay. So thanks for that explanation, because I think so many women can identify with that. And I think we're the era where everybody remembers the Karen Carpenter story, right? And
Yes.
They remember, flirting with that, or if it wasn't them, it was a friend, or it was someone in their circle, or someone on their dorm floor or in their sorority who was struggling with it. So I think, what I've found true, and I've done a lot of study, because in physical fitness, teaching at a university, you see quite a bit of it. You see the exercise bulimia, actually. And you see it among men as well. But often what I found is, while teaching at a university, and having been there and flirted with that myself in college, then it often cycles back, and women in their late 40s, early 50s are also going through kind of this resurge of disordered eating and or bulimia, and it's ironic, but it's almost like adolescence and menopause both trigger these major changes in our lives, and that is often what is a trigger for that kind of behavior. So if you're listening and you've experienced any of that, this is just to say we're not claiming we have all the answers here, but just you're not alone. So know that. So, I'd love to, I mean, you've got, you've got obviously the study of one, but now you've done this, you've helped a lot of women. What would be your biggest tips for women who struggle with emotional eating? And before you answer that, maybe it would be beneficial to unpack emotional eating and what that is, how it's triggered.
That's a really good question because people don't usually take the time to unpack it. The way I look at it, and I don't have a clinical definition of it actually, my experience with it and what women identify as emotional eating that I work with is turning to food, and usually specifically processed food, sugars, salty things, as a result of having uncomfortable feelings that they don't want to deal with. It's usually a very close cause and effect.
Very cool. Okay, so great description. Now, women who struggle with that, and I would happen to say, okay, that's just every woman, period, maybe. But in case there's one or two of you not out there, tune in next week. But what are your tips for women who struggle with that, or when we struggle with that?
And I think that's a great point too. And I think there's a continuum. I think that there's women that maybe sometimes they tend to emotional eat and sometimes they don't. Or I know I talk to the women in my program about, do they see stress eating as different from emotional eating? So there's a lot of nuances to it. I also have, in my opinion, have pointed out to women that I work with that boredom eating is emotional eating, and boredom is an emotion. So yes, a lot of these things are just what everybody does seem to do. But I think the biggest thing that I would say that I do in helping women, whether it is with any kind of binge eating behavior and habit like I had, or the emotional eating, stress eating, boredom eating, is mindfulness and pausing and just paying attention to what you're doing. So that's a lot right there, because, what exactly does that mean and how do we do that? A lot of times, the pandemic comes to mind, because when I think of the boredom eating, or everybody, all of a sudden was home by their kitchen or working in their kitchen, and before they know it, they're in the pantry. Usually when that happens, you're really not paying a lot of attention to what you're doing, especially maybe after a while. Maybe the first couple times you did it, you realized you were wandering in there and you just wanted a break. And then after a while, that became sort of like a habit, a wired habit in your brain. And you probably really don't pay attention to the fact you're doing it. It's similar to eating while scrolling the phone, eating while on the computer, eating while watching TV. None of that is being mindful. If you're not paying attention to what you're doing and you're just sort of in autopilot, you're not aware. You're not pausing long enough to actually pay attention to what you're doing. So that actually is the same thing with emotional eating. It becomes a wired habit. It's sort of like your brain being on a GPS, and that's the route that's been programmed in the GPS. This is what we do when we feel blank. I have women that talk about, with stress, they tend to eat, but with like grief and sadness, they tend tend to lose their appetite, or, you can have specific issues like that. But I have every, variety of situation, and I was the same. Some of us don't even have enough awareness to realize that we react differently with those types of emotions, that with some emotions we eat, with some emotions we don't eat. I didn't. I had absolutely no connection between emotion and what I was doing until, like I said, I watched this movie, and it was like the same feelings were coming over me that were coming over her when she would be triggered to eat. So yeah, just practicing that pause and becoming self-aware and living more mindfully in general. When you realize, for example, that the pandemic hit and you are going to eat at home, it shouldn't really be a surprise that I'm going to be by my kitchen. Maybe I should, stay aware of what I'm doing, because if I start creating this habit, it will just be wired. And then real quick, the other thing too, as far as the binge eating part of it, a huge factor in that, as I had mentioned already, is that extreme dieting does tend to cause binge eating, because it's sort of like a gas tank. If you let it get to zero, you might need 20 gallons of gas. But if you let your belly, your stomach, your gas tank get to only half empty, you only need 7 gallons of gas and less food to fill it up. So it sort of just stands to reason that the hungrier you let yourself get, you're setting yourself up for that just primal instinct in you to binge, because your brain thinks you're in a famine and it's trying to keep you alive. So that's how they sort of go together. Binge eating can come just from dieting, but also the emotional triggers to binge eat, or the triggers just to emotional or stress eat, come from just that lack of awareness that we can pause and that our brains get wired to just cue up certain behaviors. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. And I want to kind of address this piece that, as you're working with somebody about the physicality of dieting, so severe restriction, what happens to the body, what's triggered, not just in the body, but then in the brain, and then the re-eating, the refueling, the feasting, then sometimes over an abundance, there's the guilt and the shame. So there's this emotional eating is just rampant, right? It's at one end and at the other. But the underlying piece of it, how much do you dig into when you're working with people, the maybe worthiness, or the fact that we might be trying to cause our own pain, as odd as that sounds, because maybe we've grown up in a certain environment where that was actually our comfort zone, and it's what we knew. How much do you unpack that?
That's really so good, Deborah. I think so. The health coaching program that I went to, they actually did give us some sessions around not only like triggers, handling triggers, but also like body image, how you developed your body story. And so I do that in the program. And also, acknowledging that people might not be ready to go there, and that's okay. Because that's such a big point. The very first thing I also do in the program is the first week, I make very clear, I call it Body from a Place of Love, that this whole thing is about honoring yourself, doing health promoting behaviors and self-care that is from a place of honoring yourself. It's not out of, self-hate, and I'm sure you have deal with the same thing. We're already so hard on ourselves, and women and body image and eating and everything, let alone adding the menopausal changes and the body's going rogue and all of that on top of it. That's a lot.
Yeah, for sure. Love it. Okay. this is a good one because a lot of women think, well, if I just had more willpower, or I'm not motivated, or I'm not disciplined. I hear this very frequently. And so, what is your response to a woman who says, I have no willpower, I'm not motivated, can't get motivated? How can a woman change her eating and exercise habits without relying on willpower or motivation?
Yeah, this is so unknown. We are taught, I think, and just innocently believe that we can find motivation somewhere, or there have been times where we have been super motivated, so it's effortless to go work out for that phase of time, or we somehow have ourselves so psyched up that our willpower is super strong. So because we have relied on them in the past, we feel like that's what works. So if it goes away, we don't have anything else to rely on if we don't realize that there's other resources within us. So the way I explain it is it's sort of like an electric vehicle. Many of them have gas as well as electric. And so willpower and motivation might be sort of like your gas tank in your electric car. But whenever your electricity or your gas is not needed, like to get up a hill, the battery is the electricity is what the fuel that the car runs on. So just like you can use the willpower and motivation when you have it, you can tap into a different energy source within you. And that is, again, this mindfulness aspect and brain wiring, and just realizing that basically the way I describe it is that willpower and motivation are a lot like any feeling. They're very fickle. You can't control them all the time. They come and go without us doing anything differently. I, for example, this morning this is the Monday after Thanksgiving. I did not get up at 4:30 in the morning over the Thanksgiving break like I do usually. And so I knew last night that this morning was going to be very hard to get up at 4:30 in the morning again. If I waited to feel motivated to do that, I'd probably be waiting till the spring when it gets light and warm out again in Pennsylvania. So and I also will tell you that this is not about self-discipline, because I feel like, again, that's me sort of forcing myself to believe that I'm trying. Self-discipline is a hard one for me, and I think some people may just call that self-discipline. But I feel like I've just surrendered to the fact that I literally can stand up and get out of my bed, whether I'm motivated or not. And I can stop myself from emotional or stress eating, whether I have willpower or not. I can step away from the refrigerator. I physically have the ability to do that. I don't have the ability to design a rocket ship right now, or do brain surgery or trigonometry, but I do have the ability to stand up, whether I feel like it or not. So that's what I mean about just tapping into just an awareness and an understanding of how our brains and our feelings work, versus relying on those and those alone.
Great answer. Yeah, I really love that. And so simple, and yet I think we sometimes struggle and make the easy complex.
Yes.
Yeah. So what would be one thing, and I really love that, well, I don't love it happened to you, but I love that whatever happened to you, you've turned into a positive and something that you're turning around and telling others, because you've been there and you have walked in their shoes. So what would be the one thing that you would want women to know who continue to struggle to improve eating habits and self-care? If you could give them just one tidbit, what would that be?
Oh, I love that, because I think it comprises a lot of what we've been talking about so far, is that we have a lot of guilt and shame about that. So because we're already so shameful about struggling with this issue over and over again, or ashamed of our relationship with food, and there's a lot of secrecy around that, that in and of itself becomes like another hurdle. You know, we're trying to like not be so down on ourselves, in addition to the fact that we have these habits to overcome. So, you know, very much easier said than done, but please, you know, relieve yourself of that shame and blame, because you are doing the best you can, and you've done the best you can with what you knew to do. Again, everyone, I would think in your audience, Deborah, or most of us growing up with this diet mentality, many of us inherited these disordered eating patterns because of the diet mentality we grew up with, and that is nothing to be ashamed of. Our brains were just doing what they needed to do to try to keep us alive with all of these extremes we were going through. So first, getting rid of that shame and blame, and therefore having hope and knowing and believing and trusting. All right, well, if this was almost logical and it didn't have anything to do with me being weak, frail, something wrong with me, then it's about, you know, learning the skills and, you know, following the skills, and absolutely working with someone who specializes like in this age group and with a very just reasonable, sensible, I work with a baby step approach. I know Deborah talks so much about not the extremes, not over exercising. It's just so important to help heal that. You will just start, this is what the women in my program notice, these things just die down. The struggles they had all these years just start to die down. It just calms down because you are not doing this same approach over and over and over again.
So very rich. Okay, so I know that listeners are going to want to know where can they get more Debbie? Where can they find you?
Well, it's pretty easy. Just Debbie Thompson Coaching. So on Instagram or my website, or on Facebook. Actually, Facebook is just Debbie Thompson. I do not have a page right now, but I have a public profile, so I can be found there.
Okay, great. And you have a Facebook group too?
Yes, I do. It's called Women Thriving Over 40.
Fantastic. And, you know, I think that also helps so many to have a group, have a village, right, of people
Yes.
who understand you. Some within that group are doing already what you want to be doing or wish you were doing, and some will be right beside you struggling, and some will probably end up being the person you turn around and offer a helping hand to.
Yeah.
Which I think is really a part of the journey, is going through it and looking from all sides at where you are and what you can do. Debbie, thanks so much for joining me.
Sure.
And listeners, now it's up to you. So if there were a question that you wish you could have asked Debbie while you were in a room with her, what would that be? You can add your question or comments to the show notes at flipping50.com/beat cravings. That's beat cravings. And what are you waiting for? Let's start Flipping 50 today. Have you ever seen The Wizard of Oz? Or maybe I should ask, how many times? Do you remember when Dorothy and the Tin Man, the Lion, the Scarecrow, they finally make it to the front door only to be turned away? And then they come back with the witch's broom, but that wasn't it at all. They simply hadn't said the right words the first time they were there. And the man said, "Well, why didn't you say so in the first place?" And the doors were thrown wide open. Well, my friend, I want to give you the power to get in the first time. For a limited time this fall, I want to give you a head start out of the gate post-pandemic. Whether you're on or you're offline, I want to give you my Marketing to Women copywriting course. It's open at a special price. You can do it at your own pace, log in at your own convenience, and revisit it whenever you want to. Any updates, you've got lifetime access. If you want to connect, really connect to your ideal female customer in a way you've never thought about her before, this course will show you how. I'm sharing 5 profiles of female buyers, 12 ways to emotionally connect in an ethically sound way. And you will never hesitate before pushing send again or stare at a blank screen, not knowing what to write, or have crickets in response to your social media posts. Here's where to get in. fitnessmarketingmastery.com/copywriting-course. You'll learn more about the course, more about why I wrote it, and how I went from $5,000 a month to over 6 figures a month. You might want to replay that. Every word that you say, that you write, speak somehow matters. Make your words count. You have to articulate a clear message about what you do, who you serve, and how you help. And I want to help you do that. The world needs you right now more than ever. fitnessmarketingmastery.com/copywriting-course. And I'll see you there.